No, would y'all want to just? I don't know. I think you would lose the system you're using, but I think if I recall correctly, you can share directly from Zoom to YouTube without going through anything. Someone says they can hear in the chat. Sounds fixed. Thank you. Yes, can hear is what I read on the YouTube.
Okay, really?
I don't know.
I'm getting that too.
We good?
Yes, we're good. All right. Hey, everyone joining and everyone listening and watching. We just fixed our problems and we are here this evening, this beautiful September day, to talk about labor issues across the state of North Carolina. I want to say a big shout out to the team behind the Young Democrats Labor Caucus for joining us and helping out making this come together. And a huge thank you to all our guests tonight who are joining us from, wherever they are, whether it be on vacations or be on holidays or just their home offices. Those panelists are, in fact, Justin Conley of the NAESO. He is the communications chair, though we will not be discussing the items tonight. He brings in a lot of experience with local issues and people. Matt Ballance of the NC11 Democratic Party. He is currently the chair for them and has a lot of experience with the International Association of Firefighters out in Asheville. And has done such great work both on the local level and on, so far the state level. And I look forward to hearing more about him. Jeremy Sprinkle with the AFL-CIO. He is the communications chair for them as well and has been on so many podcasts throughout the years discussing labor issues, the labor movement, and needs of the working people. And finally, last but not least, Jessica Holmes, who ran for Commissioner of Labor of the state of North Carolina in 2020. And just a great race. I don't know how else to say that. Thanks for all of you for coming tonight, and we hope that this evening will be informational to each other, to the people watching or listening. And let's begin. What we are going to do is that I'll be asking various questions sent in by Labor Caucus members that pertain to the topic of labor throughout North Carolina. And at the end of that time of those questions, or the time, we will take a question or two from the audience that will be sent to me. And with that, I will say, also, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jesse Ross. I'm chair of the Young Democrats of North Carolina Labor Caucus. I also do stuff out in Haywood County, North Carolina. And the first question tonight is, North Carolina has historically proven a challenge for national and local union organizers. What have you seen contributing to this challenge, and how do union organizers overcome it? I'll start with Jeremy first.
Well, Jesse, thank you for the opportunity to speak to your audience tonight. I'm excited to be here, especially with these great panelists. Again, my name is Jeremy Sprinkle. I'm the communications director for the North Carolina AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO is the Federation of Labor Unions in North Carolina. And it's proven a challenge for choices that were made in some cases a long time ago, and in some cases in recent years. Choices like to make North Carolina a right to work state, right to work. We often call right to work for less in the labor movement, essentially forcing unions to represent everybody who's covered by a union contract, but not requiring that everybody pay a fair share of the cost to negotiate and enforce that contract. So that's a burden. North Carolina is one of only 2 states that forbids union contracts for employees in the public sector, that's state and local governments, something I'm sure that Matt could also speak to. And just a long history of policymakers who decide that being pro-business is being anti-worker. But these are all choices, and these policies and laws don't have to remain in force. They can be changed, and we can elect new lawmakers to the legislature who can make those changes. But I would say choices, and legal choices at that, are historically a big challenge. But North Carolina also is a state with a surprisingly rich history of union organizing, which we can perhaps get into.
Jessica, I'd love to hear your thoughts next.
Thank you. Let me start by way of just introduction. As you stated earlier, my name is Jessica Holmes. I needed to acknowledge that I came up through the Young Democrats of North Carolina ranks, and then became an Obama for America Fellow. And then in 2014, I was elected as the youngest commissioner ever elected in Wake County's history at large, representing over 1 million constituents prior to running in 2020 as Commissioner of Labor. And I currently serve as a deputy commissioner in the North Carolina Industrial Commission. That is a mouthful, but I needed to give a disclaimer that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not on behalf of the North Carolina Industrial Commission. Now, to get directly to the question, first, let me just state that I second everything that Jeremy said. And so I won't repeat anything that he said, but I just want to build on it by talking about elections. People see elections as this big, great thing, but it's really simple. It's really math. People come out to vote, and the person with the most votes wins. We have, if everything goes according to plan. But I think one of the biggest challenges to changing these laws is voter apathy. They have this saying, Democrats need to fall in love, Republicans fall in line, and just voter apathy. So, in Obama's first election, people were so excited that they showed up. His next election, they showed up, but a little less so. And turnout has not reached those same levels since then. And you see so many people saying, well, I didn't get this out of the administration, or I didn't get this out of the administration. I'll speak directly to the student loan reforms that we've seen. Some people are saying, well, $10,000 isn't enough. I'm not going to turn out. Or $20,000 isn't enough. I'm not going to turn out. And we're so very isolated on one particular thing that we don't look at the other 10 things that might be going in our direction. And we also don't acknowledge all the rights that might be at stake in a particular election. So I always encourage people to turn out for every single election. In North Carolina, we have an election every year. Don't just turn out in presidential elections. Don't just turn out when you have a candidate that you like who's on the ballot. I can't tell you how many people when I was campaigning would tell me, oh, I'll only vote if there's someone that I know who's on the ballot. I'll leave you all with this quote that if you don't do politics, then politics will do you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for clarifying everything. And I appreciate all of that, especially since it does actually talk to, I've been canvassing the last week and I've gotten a lot of that. Matt, would you like to go next?
Sure. First, just to echo everybody else, I want to thank the Young Democrats for hosting this event, for having us all tonight. Just a quick kind of reintroduction of myself. My name is Matt Ballance. I'm the district chair for the 11th Congressional District for the North Carolina Democratic Party. I'm also a firefighter with the city of Asheville, North Carolina, where I've been for the last 14 and a half years. And I have been a union member with the International Association of Firefighters for the last 14 and a half years. IFF Local 332 here in Asheville. And for 9.5 years, until just recently, I was the Secretary Treasurer for the Asheville Firefighters Association. So I spent about 9.5 years in leadership with our local. To the question, I don't want to kind of piggyback too much of what Jeremy said, but with my background and where I come from a public sector standpoint, I definitely feel like the fact that we are one of 2 states where it's constitutionally prohibited for public sector employees to bargain in this state is a massive. It makes for a massive uphill climb for public sector unions in our state. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it's actually quite the opposite. We have shown, at least on the firefighter standpoint, and I know that other unions have, that we are growing in the state, and not just in the state, but the IFF is growing across the country, internationally as well. And there's a reason for that. People, if you look at just the labor market today, and you look at the labor, environment, it's not just in public sector, but it's across the board. Unions are growing right now because there's a lot of unrest with what people are seeing in their workplace, and there's it seems to be a newfound passion with a lot of, especially younger individuals, to organize and to join the labor movement. So that's a very positive thing to see. But in terms of North Carolina, I think from my standpoint as a public sector employee, definitely that constitutional prohibition is a massive thing that's been hard for us to overcome.
That is a great segue actually into what Justin might have thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, no, so I just want to begin, and it would be really, sort of bad of me to start without saying that, like, I would not be able to do the work that I do every day without the young Democrats in North Carolina. So I'm from Franklin, North Carolina, born and raised. And I got started with my organizing through the Young Democrats. When for some reason, they elected me president back in 2014. And we helped get young people elected from Murphy to Manio, including folks like my dear friend Jessica, when we brought in 100 folks to knock doors in Wake County. So I'm very thankful for this organization and thankful for you and the Labor Caucus for bringing us all together, because this is something that obviously I'm very passionate about, and I'm really excited that y'all are as passionate about it as I am. With that, like, because of the work that I was doing for YDNC, I took a job organizing and working for the North Carolina Association of Educators. And then the work that I did there, working for rank and file educators, has led me to work for the National Education Association here in Washington, D.C. We're the largest labor union in the country, and I'm proud to help the 3 million NEA members in their fight for fairness and supporting them. And I'm also a very proud member of the National Staff Organization. So every NEA affiliate across the country has staff, and we're all unionized too. And I'm very proud to be the comms chair of my local NISO, where we work to support our educators. To your question, Jeremy knocked it out of the ballpark. Like, a lot of the laws that are on the book, I think it's North Carolina General Statute 95 and some other numbers. I'm not an attorney. Jessica is. She can cover that for you. But all that to say, there's a lot of laws that really stem from Jim Crow and some other really poor times in our history that have stopped us from organizing. So, like, I don't want to belabor that, but I will say that I think one of the biggest challenges that North Carolina has is just sort of a lack of understanding, or sort of a culture of unionism. It's been so removed for so long that folks are kind of confused. So, like, there's a lot of folks who think that a union is just a means to collectively bargain, and that's such a detrimental error to the power that we have as people, because there's 2 types of power. There's organized money and organized people. And, that's sort of what we're fighting against, organized money. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but we do have the power to sort of overcome it. And, it is really inspiring. Gallup just released a poll. 71% of Americans support labor unions. So they are popular. The values of unions align with young people, and we really do have an opportunity in the South.
All that is so, I'll probably end up saying this is also important a few times because it is, but something I'll hit on there is that I myself am actually uneducated in terms of labor stuff, despite being the chair of the Labor Caucus. I was asked to be part of it. I said yes. And I said so because, I need to learn about this. And part of that education, going a bit wider for a second, discussing the movement as a whole, we've hit on it a little bit, but what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the labor movement? Like, the actual, the perceptions hoisted upon people fighting for labor rights, et cetera, et cetera. And I do also just want to mention that, anyone, feel free to piggyback off other people's comments and, just to discuss that way. This time around, though, I will start with Jessica.
Jesse, you mentioned about how you had been going around knocking doors, and we've all experienced, knocking doors, and you keep hearing, people say things like, I don't have time, or I'm busy, or I'm distracted. I'm going to break your question down a couple of ways. I think one of the greatest challenges facing workers in general right now, one would be inflation, and also the cost of living. So although the cost of living has increased very substantially, our country's minimum wage has stayed the same since 2009. It doesn't take a political scientist or a lawyer to tell you that if you go into the grocery store, you're going to get a lot less today than you would have gotten even 3 years ago. So I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, I'm busy, I'm struggling, I'm just trying to make ends meet. And that's why I'm not involved in the political process. So there's so many things facing our workers, from low wages to being overworked. And it was already noted in terms of our inability in North Carolina to collectively bargain. Something that has not been mentioned in terms of laws, specifically in North Carolina and any other state, that is at-will employment, meaning our workers can be fired for any reason or no reason at all, subject to very few exceptions. So for example, unless they were fired due to something that violates federal law or state laws, and or some type of specific breach of contract, then workers are really afraid to speak out. They're afraid because they need to work for a living. They're already struggling to make ends meet, and oftentimes don't want to risk losing their source of employment. And so some of those exceptions to the at-will requirement is you cannot be fired for example, your race, your color, your sexual orientation. And there are other exceptions to that, for example, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the American with Disabilities Act. But I really do believe that between workers being overwhelmed and overworked and struggling financially just to make ends meet, we can't reiterate enough how the laws in North Carolina are buried. Particularly, the two I'll focus on are the fact that we are an at-will state, and also the fact that you can't engage in a legally enforceable collective bargaining agreement here in North Carolina.
How might that have affected the firefighters and whatnot, despite having some recent successes? And this question for Matt.
What exactly do you mean? What would?
Well, in your experience, has that affected what it's meant to be a firefighter in the state of North Carolina?
No, not for me. And I think majority of the individuals that are in membership in locals across the state would say the same. I mean, we would love to have the ability to bargain for a contract. That being said, we have also, And I think we've done a very good job at it over the years, learned different ways to be effective without having a contract in place. We've learned how to, kind of to what Jessica said earlier, I mean, we've learned how to use politics to our advantage. We've learned how to lobby our legislators and our local officials to get things that we need and to get public support behind those initiatives to help us in that lobbying effort. So it's not just us as firefighters that are talking to our elected officials, it's the public as well who's making their voice known, because we've done a good job of making a case to the individuals that we serve to have our back and to know that they need to go to bat for us when we need them as well. And to also use things like the media. We've definitely tried to up our game in terms of communications and media outreach to try to get our message across. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a contract, the individuals that we have to win over are elected officials. And that's where we've kind of made it our bread and butter over the last, at least the last decade, 15 years that I've been involved with union here in North Carolina, at least in the firefighters aspect.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of jumped on a different question for you, Matt, but do you have any thoughts on the other question of what are the biggest challenges facing the larger labor movement?
Yeah, I mean, and kind of to piggyback off my last answer, if you don't like the way that labor is looked at in the state from a governmental standpoint, vote them out. We've got to elect leaders, whether it's in your municipal governments or your county governments or at the legislature, that respect workers and or have the backs of working people in this state. So at the end of the day, if you don't like the decisions that are being made in terms of labor in the state, organize and vote them out and vote in officials that are going to have the backs of workers in this state. The only other thing, Jessica hit on this earlier, apathy. I think it's one thing to get really energized and passionate about labor or the labor movement, when it's kind of presented to you at first, but you got to keep that steady stream of passion going all the way throughout the years, especially if you're working on an issue that takes 4 or 5 years to try to get a good resolution on. And second, I mean, in terms of what you were talking about, Jesse, in terms of labor history, a big part of the history of the labor movement is the community around it, and the aspect that when you're part of a union, that's not just a group of workers that you're just touching base with on a day-to-day basis. That's your family. That's your brothers and sisters in the labor movement, and you have to embrace that community aspect, that familial aspect of it, to get you through times when you're fighting for things. So that's not really something that's a setback. That's something people need to be cognizant of and really try to embrace. And it's not just about the contract or the issue at hand, but it's about rallying around each other in life as well as workers. So.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that answer. Justin.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge facing the labor movement, like if we're taking it from a macro perspective, it's runaway extremist capitalism. Like what's happening is people are putting everything before the rights of workers, how they're treated. You saw what's going on with Amazon workers, what the sort of stuff that organization, like the company was putting them through, Jeff Bezos, just inhumane stuff. And turn of the century, we fought for all these rights, making sure children didn't work, making sure that, OSHA was a thing. And I don't know if we've forgotten it. I also think that if we're talking about the union, and Matt nailed it when he talked about our union family, all right? The union is not a third party thing. The union is just your coworkers. It's you. It's becoming a member. It's if you have the opportunity to join a union, it's joining that union. It's paying your dues so we can organize better and more collectively. It's not a service. It's a very active thing. And I think, I talked a little bit about organized money. Because I'm talking to the young Democrats, I'll say that this isn't just an affliction of Republicans. There are Democrats who are bought and paid for by big moneyed interests, and they vote for anti-worker laws or they will leave the room and let those laws be enacted. So, as Democrats, one of the sort of challenges that we face is if we are going to be the party that is pro-worker, that believes in these things, we need to make sure that our lawmakers are voting that way and are held accountable when they're not. So I think organized money is and just sort of special interests entrenching themselves within the political process is just definitely something that a huge challenge that we're going to have to overcome. And again, like there are when people learn what unions are fighting for, we talk a lot about collective bargaining, right? So when you collectively bargain, it's not just you and your colleagues as members of the union going to your place of business or to a local government and saying, hey, these are the things we want in the contract. Oftentimes when people are going to bargain a contract, they are looping in other stakeholders, the community, what would work best for that community, what would work best for everybody if we got a good contract for educators, for example. So I think that is definitely something not having those protections and those rights is something that's very problematic. It's not the end of the world, and we should continue to organize to move forward and continue to organize to get to a place where we do have those rights.
All right. And Jeremy.
So the biggest challenge facing the labor movement as a whole, I'm going to say federal labor law. It's really outdated. I mean, the National Labor Relations Act was passed in the 1930s, and that's a long time ago. And the most important update in all that time is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. This is federal legislation that was introduced into Congress. It passed the House. It is stuck in the Senate. The Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, would do several important things to level the playing field for workers once again after many decades of employers seeking to game the system. So we're talking about eliminating right to work. So right to work would no longer be a thing anywhere in the United States, not just in North Carolina, but anywhere else. Right to work would be gone. Putting in place real penalties, consequences for the choices that corporations make when they choose to be bad employers and to try and squash our basic guaranteed freedom to join together in union. So the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the need to reform federal labor law, but it's not just about the PRO Act, it's also about the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. This is another very important piece of legislation that's before Congress that would repeal the prohibitions like our Jim Crow era law, General Statute 9598, which denies public workers in North Carolina the freedom to negotiate for a better life. The Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act would eliminate that prohibition in North Carolina and the other state that currently has it. So there are changes that could be made to federal labor law that would really do a lot to rein in these challenges. But, it's not just about the law. A couple of other folks, the other speakers have already spoke to this, and Jessica was talking about apathy. There's this sense of precarity. It can be really difficult making ends meet. And when it's really difficult to make ends meet, it can be, easy to fear taking action that might, jeopardize your ability to do that. And, but I think what we're seeing right now in this current moment is that despite these challenges, people have reached their resistance point. And when you get to your resistance point, you have two paths to walk. You can walk the path of fear, or you can walk the path of hope. And unions are how working people secure fairness in our economy. Unions are how working people reach for hope so that our hard work is respected and so that one job is actually enough to provide for ourselves and our families and give us the freedom to thrive, but also the freedom to contribute to our shared prosperity. And so that with that hope, we can address those big challenges, those inadequacies in federal labor law. We can pass the PRO Act, we can pass the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, and we can secure an opportunity to live a better life in North Carolina and across the country.
You know, I'm gonna switch a question real fast, but before I do, I just want to mention that we did schedule an hour, and because of the technical blah, we are running a little bit behind. Just to say that, you know, brief talking is better, not better, because I love what you're giving me, actually. I think it's so wonderful. We just, you know, are constrained a little bit by time, that's all. But to really go off what Jeremy just said, this question I'm going to skip to is actually, how can the Democratic Party orient itself to support the labor movement? And I'll start with Matt Ballance on this one.
Well, I mean, I think it's not to make it too simplistic or basic, but I mean, if we're going to be kind of what Justin said earlier, we're going to be the party of labor, the party that, you know, supports workers, we need to put our money where our mouth is and truly, you know, put out, you know, whether that's through our platform, whether that's through legislators that are in office, local officials, put our money where our mouth is and really support workers when it comes down to it, and not shy away from hard discussions and hard issues when something comes up in terms of workers' rights and the betterment of, you know, the lives of workers in this state. Again, like I said, that might be a little too general or too simplistic, but from a party standpoint and somebody that's in leadership inside the party, what I want to see in the 11th district, whether that's through candidates that are running or people that are already in office that are Democrats inside of District 11, support workers. Don't just talk about it, do it. You know, and at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to from a party standpoint. To me, we have to put our money where our mouth is.
All right, Justin.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Because I'm speaking to the young Democrats, and because y'all are supposed to be the hellraisers of the Democratic movement, you know, I think it's up to y'all as well to hold, you know, the state party and candidates and lawmakers in our own party accountable. So when they decide to take a walk around Fayetteville Street and not vote on something, call them out. If they're terrible and you're in a district that is pro-worker, primary them. It's not popular to say, like, people are afraid of that, but like sometimes it requires organizations like Young Democrats to get to the values of why we're here in the first place and what brought us into this party. You know, if I didn't believe in this stuff, I might be a Republican, but I believe in workers' rights, and I believe that, you know, I know for a fact that I'm at where I'm at currently because my grandpa was a Teamster for the time, and my other grandfather was a member of the American Postal Workers Union. Like, their unions gave me a life outside of our means because we're working class where I come from. So I'm telling you, like, because I'm talking to young Dems and I love y'all, like, you know, get messy. Make sure that you're holding our own folks accountable, because it's really hard for us to go at the folks on the other side of the aisle or anyone else if we don't have our own shop in order.
Jeremy.
What can the Democratic Party do to orient itself towards the labor movement? I will first say that, you know, one thing is to organize that unions are not an extension of the Democratic Party. And you don't get to take the labor vote for granted. If you want to earn the vote of working people, you have to show up for working people when it counts. And if you're an elected official, that means when you're presented with those choices, that you stand with working people, even if it means standing against your own self-interest. The purpose of the labor movement is to build power. You know, the mission of the North Carolina AFL-CIO is to build a bigger labor movement, one that is more powerful and anti-racist, and so that we can win victories for working families in North Carolina. And if you want that force behind you, then you have to show up when those people need your help. So if you're in Congress, if you're running for Congress, it's talking about passing the PRO Act and the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. If you're in the legislature or you're running for the legislature, it's talking about repealing right to work. It's talking about repealing the ban on collective bargaining for state and local public employees. If you're in local government, it's about showing up to your city council meetings or running for office in city council, acting and talking about what can the city do, despite the limitations placed on it by the General Assembly, to make that city a union city, a more favorable city for working people. So, showing up, making those choices, being willing to be held accountable and to hold each other accountable, because the goal here isn't, from the labor movement's perspective, and I say this both working for the state AFL-CIO, but also being a union member myself of the mighty Washington Baltimore News Guild, CWA. Our mission is not partisanship for the sake of partisanship. We have an eye on the prize. It's repealing those laws. It's passing more favorable laws. It's improving the standard of living for all working people. And so that's why we're working really hard to elect people like Sherry Beasley and Wiley Nickel and Jeff Jackson, because we want to have people in power who will make different choices than the people who have come before. And so I just want to second what Justin's saying. Like, this is a real moment for young Democrats in North Carolina to be, the force behind the scenes, pushing their state and federal leadership in a direction that rises the tide for all people and lifts all boats.
Thank you so much for that inspiration. Jessica.
I'll just second everything that my brothers in the movement have already said. And I think it boils down to this. I think the Democratic Party needs to stop the lip service when it comes to supporting unions in two ways. One, put your money where your mouth is, which was already stated. I mentioned earlier that the minimum wage has not increased since 2009. That's when the federal minimum wage increased to $7.25. Well, guess who was in power in North Carolina in 2009? And many states across the country have a minimum wage above and beyond what is federally required. Now, I might have to go back and take another look at this, but I'm not aware of either party in North Carolina going and setting a minimum wage above and beyond the federal minimum wage. So, we definitely got to hold both parties accountable. And so, one, putting your money where your mouth is, making sure that we do our part to increase the minimum wage. I personally am a believer in a living wage. The fight for 15, I support that. But the reality is there's some counties in North Carolina where even $15 isn't enough. For example, here in Wake County, a living wage is more like $18, $19 an hour. And I'm pretty sure that's the same in many of our urban counties. So when Democrats are in power, you gotta walk the walk. Also, putting your vote where your mouth is. As Justin mentioned, there have been several bills. They haven't made it very far in the General Assembly, but there have been bills put forward by people like Representative Zach Hawkins, who's also came up through Young Democrats, and Senator Wiley Nickel, who have put forth bills. And if you look at who voted on those bills and how they voted, you would be surprised at how many Democrats who show up at endorsement meetings for unions, but when it comes time for them to vote and put their vote where their mouth is, there's a huge discrepancy there. So there's got to be some internal accountability.
Yeah, and we've discussed a lot of stuff that is a bit more troubling tonight, but we also want to ask you, what do you see as a recent major victory in the labor movement? And this can be a local, just in North Carolina, or from somewhere else across the country that impacts the movement here at home.
I'll jump in here if that's okay, because it's really an exciting time. Whether you want to talk about in Western North Carolina, the amazing victory of 1,800 nurses at Mission Health in Asheville, who during a pandemic took on the largest private healthcare corporation in the country and won their union. And last year secured a union contract that just this past week resulted in a successful pressure campaign to get their employer, Healthcare Corporation of America, to raise wages across their system $22 million. So that's a huge victory. It was the largest victory at a private hospital in the South in decades, but it's not the only one. This year in North Carolina, we've had 2 Starbucks locations join the rapidly growing movement across the United States, now with hundreds of Starbucks locations having voted to secure their freedom to join together in unions. Earlier this year, clinic caregivers at a federally qualified healthcare system in North Carolina became the first in the South to organize a union. And so we are buoyed by these victories, just as we are by the effort to organize at Amazon, not just in New York, but also in Garner, North Carolina, by the effort of steelworkers in just across the border in South Carolina at GD Tire to organize. Recently, steelworkers in Fayetteville were headed off a strike and secured a new contract. And these victories beget more victories. And I'm happy for anybody else to jump in if they've thought of some other stuff. But it is an exciting time.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think your answer was so comprehensive that if Jesse needs to move on and if we need to start taking questions, however you want to move forward with that.
Sure, I will give one last 20-second pause for anyone else to jump in on that answer, and then we'll move on.
I got a couple from a local standpoint, and this is in terms of firefighters across the state. From a local standpoint and on a state level, I'll try to make this within 20 seconds, Jesse, sorry. But locally here in Asheville firefighters, just last year, we got a new pay structure in place, new pay plan that saw some of our lowest paid starting firefighters gain a 34% pay increase. And that was over about a 3-year stretch of campaign that we did on a local level to really lobby our local officials and our city government to get some better pay mechanisms in place for our people. Massive win for us. On a state level, we just in this last budget here in North Carolina now have presumptive cancer legislation or cancer coverage for firefighters here in North Carolina. A massive win that we have been working on a state level for 5-6 years, easy, pushing hard, trying to get those done. And all of that, whether those on the state level or those local, none of that was with a contract. That wasn't with collective bargaining. So that shows that you can get these results without having that in place. You just got to have that organization behind you and that drive from your membership.
All right, just want to check, Justin or Jessica, any answer? All right, so we have 2 more questions tonight. The first one is to young Democrats at large. We've gone over this a little bit, but what can young people just entering into the workforce, how can young people entering the workforce help the labor movement?
I'll jump in real quick. If you have the opportunity to join your union, join your union. Even if there aren't collective bargaining rights there, it is important that you join your union, because a union is so much more than that. And I've already said it once, I'll say it till the cows come home, but you have to join the movement. And the movement, we're fighting against entrenched moneyed interest of global conglomerates and just billionaires. And we need all the power that we can have, and we can organize together. You got to join your union. And that is my number one thing. If you have the opportunity, join your union. Don't wait. Join on the first day. It's worth every penny.
The only thing I'll add to that, I think he's absolutely right. I think Justin hit it spot on. That is the biggest thing you can do. But secondly, behind that is once you join, be involved with your union. Don't just join and have that membership card or the T-shirt or whatever it is. Union is what you put into it. You get out of it what you put into it. So if you join, and by all means join, get involved, get into, get into leadership as soon as you can. Learn about the labor movement, the history of the labor movement here in North Carolina and nationwide. Those are things that are going to motivate you as you go forward and make you a better union member.
And I'll add on, not something that you can do at work, which was already covered, but what you can do in your free time, which is to volunteer and or work on a campaign. In 2020, we had two people that came up through the Young Democrat structure, myself and Jenna Wadsworth, who were two of the youngest people to ever run on the statewide ballot. And I can tell you, and I'll give a special shout out, I don't know if either of them are here, but Wilson served on my campaign team. Joseph served on my campaign team. Both are very active in Young Democrats. And had it not been for them, I would not have come as close to winning that race as I did. In a historic turnout election, we came within 1% of doing something that hasn't been done in North Carolina in probably over 20 years, which is to have someone who actually believes in workers' rights in that office. And we came so very close. And we became close because I was very well supported by Young Democrats. Justin mentioned in 2014, there were over 100 Young Democrats from across the state who showed up and showed out to elect me as the youngest commissioner in Wake County's history. And again, in 2020, it was Young Dems that showed up and showed out and got us very close to the finish line. So I can't tell you enough how critical it is for Young Democrats to not just go and vote on election day, but to also get involved in campaigns, whether it's volunteering in your free time, whether it's actually working on a campaign, because I literally would not be the person that I am today had it not been for the support of Young Democrats, like many of you all, and also, like I mentioned, like Wilson and like Joseph, who worked with me in 2020.
Jeremy, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, just what people are saying already, get involved, take the leap, reach for hope. If you want to organize your workplace, you can find out how to get involved, learn more about the process by filling out a form on our website. If you want different people in office to make different choices, figure out what you can do for Sherry Beasley to get her elected to the US Senate, to get Wiley Nickel elected to Congress, to get Jeff Jackson elected to Congress, to make Minority Leader Reeves in the North Carolina State House, the majority leader, and to, and failing that, to just make sure that Governor Cooper's veto can be sustained in the next legislative session. And beyond that, just show up. If you hear about organizing happening in your community, whether it's at a Starbucks or manufacturing facility, whether at a UPS location, whatever it is, follow the North Carolina State AFL-CIO, follow your local labor council, like the Charlotte Metro Labor Council, look for ways that you can get involved, both in the workplace, supporting workplace organizing, but also, again, absolutely, at the ballot box.
All right, moving on to our last question. And I do want to point out, I want to respect everyone's time, but the question that has been selected may bring forth a few longer answers, and I think it's worth answering it as best you can. This question comes from Kim. NC is a right-to-work state. And what rights do workers have in North Carolina? And how can workers band together to secure better pay, benefits, retirement, and security, et cetera, et cetera?
I'll jump in here and take a stab at answering that. North Carolina is a right-to-work state. It is true. Right to work is often confused with at-will employment, which unfortunately is also true. There are different states that are just cause states. So, if your employer wants to terminate your employment, they have to have a just cause for doing so. Now, whether it's at-will employment or right to work, these are changes that could be made in state law. But all that aside, you still have the right to form and join unions in North Carolina. North Carolina is not a state where unions are illegal. There are over 100,000 union members in North Carolina who day in and day out are delivering your mail and your packages, driving your kids to school or your brothers and sisters to school on the school bus, who are testing your drinking water, who are making sure that your planes have maintenance on them, who are unloading the ships that dock at our ports, who are operating the trains. So we're here, and don't let anybody tell you that you don't have the right to be a union member in North Carolina, regardless of whether or not you can have a contract. And we're fighting really hard to change that in the public sector. You have the freedom to organize and to do it for a better life. So don't let anybody try and convince you that that's not the case.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to go with that?
It was so well said that we're
I
all
agree. I mean, that pretty much sums it up right there. You hit the nail on the head.
All right, we might, if I get another question, we might have time for another question. If it's sent to me, but if it's not, I want to thank you again so much for being here. This has educated me so much, and surely the several people who are watching. This conversation, since it's going to live on YouTube for a long time, several people are going to get to see this for a while. That's just it. Thank you so much. If anyone watching and anyone joining us tonight is interested in being involved in the Young Democrats Labor Caucus, there are ways to get involved through the Young Democrats of North Carolina page on the internet. And if anyone is interested in learning more about these wonderful folks here tonight, feel free to look them up and just figure out what they're about and get involved. With that, I think we have an evening. Is there any closing comments from any of you?
Thanks for putting this on.
Yeah, thanks so much for putting this on. This is a great opportunity. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, since history's come up a couple of times, I put a link in the YouTube chat. But we've pulled together a resource page, bit.ly/NC Labor History. Learn about that history they didn't teach you in school. There's a reason they didn't teach you that history. We've recently published a podcast about our history exhibit, but go check it out, bit.ly/NC Labor History, or just Google North Carolina labor history to learn about the stuff they didn't teach you in school and get inspired as we have been.
All right, that's wonderful. Justin, any closing comments?
Wow, put me on the spot here. No, I while folks were talking, I just sort of was reminded of Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "All labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence." So we have a responsibility to workers in the state, for working families in North Carolina, to do our best for them. And that is my sort of charge to the Young Dems as a very active YD at a point in my life. So thank you for having this. Just starting this organizing now is super important and will pay dividends later on.
Mm-hmm. Matt, Ballance?
Just want to thank Young Dems again for doing this tonight. I kind of want to echo, as we leave, something that we talked about earlier from a party standpoint. Remember, as Young Dems, as you're moving up and you're going into roles either in campaigns or you're being elected as elected officials, as the years go by, remember, put your money where your mouth is in terms of labor in the state. Back workers. If we're going to be the party, and I'm saying this as chair of the 11th, if we're going to be the party that backs workers, let's do it. So just remember that as you're going forward.
All right. And Jessica?
I just want to spend my time saying thank you to YDNC. YDNC has always had the opportunity to be the moral compass of the party, to be the heartbeat of the party. Had it not been for my visibility in YDNC, I would have never been recruited to run for office. So I encourage anyone that maybe hasn't paid their dues or hasn't decided to be active in YDNC to really rethink that, because you really don't know, where it's going to end up or what opportunities might end up coming before you because of your participation in YDNC. And again, just want to stress that YDNC has always been the moral compass, and that requires sometimes saying things that the party doesn't like, that requires sometimes holding candidates accountable for what they say versus what they do. So yeah, I just want to close out in a state of gratitude and appreciation for YDNC, for all that YDNC has done for me, and the fact that I'm just a fan of the organization and look forward to following what you all are going to do in the future.
All right. Thank you again so much for joining us this evening, and we deeply appreciate it. With that, we'll close it out.
Bye, y'all.